Good afternoon everyone and welcome back to the Rah Rah Rabbit. So today I thought I would do a slightly different video. As most of you are aware by now, unless you're new to my channel, I am trans. I am a transgender man, meaning that I was assigned female at birth and I transitioned to male. This was something that took a very long time for me to figure out and to come to terms with, and as well as the actual process of medically and socially transitioning, there was a lot of personal stuff that I had to kind of figure out as well. So transitioning isn't an easy thing to do. I imagine for a lot of people who aren't really part of the trans community or know anything about trans people, I think there's this idea that one day you wake up and decide you want to be a different gender, you go to the doctors, and then in a sort of stars in their eyes sort of way, you go through some doors and then you come out of the smoke a different gender, just like that. And it's not a simple process. It doesn't happen like that. For me, it took from my initial referral to getting on hormones about 3 years, and that was when the waiting list was probably only like a couple of months. Nowadays waiting lists for gender clinics are up to a few years, so you've got to wait a few years before you have the initial assessment to figure out if they will allow you to medically transition. So there's a great deal of stuff you have to go through. There's a lot of jumping through hoops. There's a lot of trying to convince people that this is the right choice for you. There's all this social transitioning as well. There is a lot to go through. But one of the, issues for me was, I didn't really know anything about trans people myself when I was figuring out that I was trans. And my knowledge was incredibly limited. A lot of my views were very ignorant and problematic. I didn't realise that at the time, because again, it was something that you very rarely heard about. So I just hadn't been exposed to these things, and I didn't know what was right and what was wrong. So I grew up in the 90s and early noughties, and again, there was some stuff around, but it was not as widely known or accepted. I didn't know any trans people. I had never met a trans person personally. I'd never spoken to one, and all I really knew at that point, sort of as a child, the only thing I sort of knew about trans people was, or what I thought it was, I thought it was something that only affected men. And it was men who, it was some sort of condition that made them want to be a woman, or made them think they were a woman, or made them want to dress up like a woman. So in my head, trans was sort of like drag queens, transvestites, transsexuals. They all kind of existed in the same bubble for me. And again, the word transgender wasn't really used. The word at that point would have been transsexual, and it was typically used in a more derogatory way. So I kind of had negative things associated with it. And I'd seen trans people out and about. I had seen trans women, and typically the trans women that I had seen were trans women that didn't pass very well as women. And obviously being very young and noticing these things, you as a child, without knowing anything about trans people, your thought is, oh, okay, there's a man there dressed as a woman. And as children do, whenever you see something that you're not used to or that's a bit out of the ordinary, you tend to stare or ask questions, and usually the adults around you get quite embarrassed and tell you not to look, don't say anything, just ignore that person, stuff like that. And as a kid, I interpreted that to mean that, oh, don't look at them because that's bad, or don't say anything because that's bad, we don't want to draw attention to them, we don't want them to notice us, just ignore them, there's something wrong with that. That's how my child brain interpreted it. Not so much, oh god, this is a topic I don't know how to talk about with my kid, and I hope they don't say anything embarrassing, and I hope they don't offend that person, or it becomes an awkward situation. I didn't read it as that. I read it as, okay, something is wrong with this person. So I would again, when I say I'm a kid, I'm talking like between like the ages of maybe like 5 and 10. So, you know, I don't. It's not a topic that I'm gonna really been exposed to much or know anything about or know how to handle. And of course, the adults in my life had no reason to educate me on these topics, because again, it wasn't something that they knew much about or had entered their life much at all. Chances are I'd walked past many trans women who, you know, passed as cisgender women, and potentially I've walked past tons of trans men and even non-binary people. I mean, although the term non-binary, we see that as a sort of a more recent thing, and I guess the way in which people express their gender now feels very different. I guess non-binary people would have always existed. Maybe they would have been more androgynous, or, you know, again, non-binary doesn't equal androgyny necessarily, but just thinking about what I might have seen sort of during the 90s, you know, there probably were lots of different gender expressions around, but I wouldn't have known, you know, anything about that. And if I'd seen somebody who looked like a man, then they were a man. If I saw someone who looked like a woman, then they were a woman. And I'd probably had seen tons of trans men, but again, they would have either passed as cisgender men, so I wouldn't have thought anything of it, or they wouldn't have passed, and I probably would have just thought, oh, that's a woman wearing more masculine clothes, because that was okay. That didn't seem to be as big of an issue as men wearing women's clothes. Because again, that always seemed to be used in comedy quite a lot. You know, a character that was sort of very masculine, very big, very hairy, very just like gruff man dressed as a woman, thinking that they're a woman, you know, trying to be really feminine. You know, it was almost like a joke, this thing. So that was like the image that I had of trans women, essentially. So yeah, for me, figuring out that I was trans was kind of a wild ride. So, you know, I'd grown up being labelled a tomboy. I guess felt I fit in better with the boys. Most of my interests were more male-leaning. And obviously that doesn't mean that if you are a tomboy, or if you are a girl or a woman who is more masculine-leaning, that you are trans or that you should be a man. Not at all. This is just for me personally. On my journey, you know, I started off as a tomboy, and then once, you know, I kind of hit puberty, you know, things became quite difficult for me. I kind of thought that once I hit puberty, like, I would just sort of become very feminine and I would be okay with that. It was one of those things where I thought being a tomboy was something that I would grow out of. So I'd hit puberty, I'd kind of become more feminine, I would feel more comfortable as a girl, and so on. But that didn't happen. And for a long time I thought, okay, well, maybe I am just a more masculine girl. Or maybe, you know, that's fine, there isn't a problem with that, I'll go with that. But again, that just wasn't enough. It still wasn't the right fit. I still didn't feel comfortable in myself. There was still something that just didn't line up correctly. And so when I started thinking about the potential that I was trans, or that I wanted to be male, it was really quite a big shock for me, because although I wouldn't have called myself transphobic in the sense that I hated trans people, or I thought, you know, that there was something bad about them, or, you know, I thought there were some people who liked to dress up or think they were the opposite gender, and that was that. I didn't put a lot of thought into it. I didn't really care if that's what people did. But I still didn't really understand it. And then when I was sort of realising it myself, it meant I had to face a lot of this internalized transphobia, I guess. You know, I wasn't transphobic in the sense that I hated trans people or I didn't agree with them, but I guess I would have been transphobic in the sense that a lot of people are, and just that they are not educated on the subject. A lot of their beliefs are based on ignorance. They don't mean to be hurtful in any way. They might not necessarily realise that the things that they think or do are wrong. But I was the same, really. That I just had a lot of problematic beliefs. So when I was, deciding to transition, I didn't know the word transgender. Again, I knew the word transsexual, but it had always been a very kind of, almost like a bit of a dirty word. So the thing that I googled was sex change, which again is, very old-fashioned and isn't a good reflection of transitioning. And then, I started googling things and learning more about trans people and realising that this was something that I potentially was. And, it brought up a lot of mixed feelings. I don't want to say I felt horrified, because that sounds pretty nasty, but, there was a lot of conflict in that. Although, again, it wasn't like I had an issue with trans people, but in my head it was still something that was kind of a bit weird or a bit wrong, or I don't know, I suppose almost devious in a way. I kind of had that slight thought about it, which, it was really difficult for me to kind of face that and deal with that. And obviously it made me realise that a lot of the thoughts that I had, or the beliefs that I had, were uneducated, and there was so much more to this than I was kind of aware of. So it took me a long time to deal with that, and as well because I have a lot of internalized stuff. I experience a lot of internalized ableism, just to do with all my sort of neurodivergent stuff and mental health stuff. I've always been very harsh on myself for those things. So, I deal with a lot of internalized stuff. So even now I would say there's still some internalized transphobia, there's some internalized homophobia. There's all these things that, when it comes to other people, I'm fine about, but when it comes to myself, I almost feel like there's something wrong with it. And I'm sure lots of other people kind of have similar experiences. Even though I grew up in an environment that was sort of supportive and quite chilled out about these things, you still kind of worry that the people around you are gonna have a problem with it, or gonna feel, I don't know, a certain way about it. So this was all back in like 2009, 2010. So again, it was kind of at the beginning of the trans explosion. I don't really know what we want to call this, but obviously now things are much different. More people are aware of the word trans or transgender. A lot of people are more aware of what that involves now, and some of the science behind it, or some of the thinking behind it. All the various approaches to the subject that people have. It's been talked about more. We've got trans characters in TV and video games, which is fantastic. It's still very far behind in a lot of ways. When people say LGBT, they often forget about the trans part and just mainly focus on the gay aspect of it. There's a lot more education and a lot more people like myself who are kind of willing to talk about it, or and share their experiences. Because originally I said that I was going to be stealth. I was just going to live my life, as a straight passing guy. Everything was going to be fine. But then I sort of realised that, I am a man, and it doesn't matter what people say about that. As far as I'm concerned, I'm a man. That's that. I'm just a different type of man. But a lot of my life and a lot of my experiences have been shaped by being raised and socialised as female. I take into account that, if I had been born as a cis man, I might be a completely different person. So part of me feels like, I may not have had the childhood I wanted. I may not have had the experiences that I wished I'd had, growing up as a boy. But I've had all these other experiences, I've been socialised as female, I can kind of connect to what that means to be female in society a little bit. I feel that, I don't know, I can't really ignore that was my past, and I'm quite happy now to accept that and speak to people about it. That's kind of why I do this. So yeah, that's kind of just what I want to talk about, really, how even figuring things out, the sort of internal journey that I had to go through of figuring out my own feelings about being trans and dealing with internalized transphobia, and having to reevaluate all my beliefs and go and learn about things. And I had to tackle my own demons in that sense of what I believed. So yeah, this is one reason again why I try not to get too angry at people who do say ignorant or stupid things. I think there is a big difference between someone who says something that is outright hateful and wishes you harm, versus a stupid, flippant, throwaway comment that the other person probably didn't realise was an issue, but they're just uneducated on the topic. So I try to be very patient with people and not get too hurt or defensive when things are said, when it's clear that it wasn't meant out of malice. At the same time, though, it's not an excuse to let people get away with ignorance or saying things out of ignorance. I think if people are willing to learn or willing to change their behaviour and are willing to do better, then that's great. That's kind of all you can really ask for. If someone isn't willing to do that, if someone really doesn't care about learning about trans issues, who's just it's just not something that they're going to ever give a shit about, then you kind of have to just kind of cut your losses and that's it. Well, I just won't engage with this person. Difficult when we're all online now, and it's very easy to get lost in all the social media bollocks. But yeah, that's kind of just what I wanted to say. People can change, and I think that's the thing to focus on. I mean, after all, Rara used to be an absolutely savage racist, but look at him now. Thank you for watching, guys. That's it for today. If you'd like to support me on Patreon, you can check out the link in the description below. You can also check out my Redbubble page for some of my designs, including this Pride t-shirt. There's also links to my social media accounts and everything else. So thank you very much for watching, guys. I have been Max, aka the Raw Rabbit, and I'll see you in the next video.